My mother's final words shattered me. I wasn't her child. I'd been taken from a powerful family. That same day, my siblings laughed and threw me onto the street. I survived shelters and silence, until men in suits found me and revealed who my real father was. Then they told me one truth that made my blood run cold. Before I tell you everything, take a second to support my channel, tap subscribe, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and help this story reach the people who need to hear it. For 38 years, I believed I was Elias Moore, the middle son of a worn-down machine operator in the rusted outskirts of Dayton, Ohio. I lived a simple, narrow life. I sent money home every month. I showed up to every holiday dinner. I was the one who held my mother's hand through 6 months of chemotherapy, whispering lies about things getting better even when we both knew they wouldn't. I thought I knew exactly who I was. That belief died on a rain-soaked Tuesday in March at St. Vincent Mercy Hospital. My mother, at least the woman who raised me, Clara Moore, lay motionless in the bed, her chest rising shallowly beneath thin sheets. Pancreatic cancer had hollowed her out faster than any of us were ready to admit. Machines hummed and beeped around her, marking time more accurately than any clock. My older brother, Victor, stood by the window scrolling through his phone, irritated by the inconvenience of dying happening on a workday. My younger sister, Lena, sat in the corner filing her nails, the soft scratch echoing in the sterile room like an insult. They had always been harder than me. Sharper. Less sentimental. I told myself that was just how families were. Then Clara's eyes snapped open. Not the dull, drugged gaze we'd seen for weeks, but clear. Focused. Terrified. Her fingers, thin, icy, but stronger than they had any right to be, wrapped around my wrist and yanked me closer. Her grip hurt. Elias, she whispered, her voice breaking like brittle paper. You need to listen to me. Right now. I leaned in, thinking she was confused, thinking the medication was finally stealing her mind. I started to reach for the call button. Her grip tightened. You're not my son. The words didn't land at first. They floated in the air, meaningless, absurd. I laughed nervously. Mom, it's okay. I'm here. Victor looked up from his phone. Lena froze mid-stroke. Clara pulled me closer until I could smell antiseptic and decay on her breath. I took you, she said, louder now. Clear enough that everyone heard. In 1986? From a family that had everything. Your real name isn't Elias Moore. It's Julian Hale. The room went silent except for the heart monitor, which began to speed up. You were born in New York, she gasped. Your father owns more buildings than I can count. He never stopped looking for you. My ears rang. My vision tunneled. Victor laughed once, sharp and ugly. What the hell are you talking about? Clara's eyes found him. I stole him, she said. And I raised him while his real family searched for a ghost. Her grip loosened. Her eyes rolled back. 20 minutes later, she was gone. The last words my mother ever spoke erased my entire life. Victor was the first to move. He crossed the room in 3 steps and slammed me back against the wall, his forearm pressing into my throat. I knew it, he snarled. I always knew something was off about you. Victor, I choked. 38 years, he said, his voice shaking with something close to rage. 38 years of pretending to be one of us. Lena stood slowly, her grocery store badge still pinned to her shirt. That's why she looked at you like that, she said coldly. It wasn't love. It was guilt. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. They didn't let me grieve. They didn't let me process. They walked me out of the hospital while Clara's body was still warm. Victor reached into my jacket pocket in the parking lot and took the $300 I'd brought to help with funeral costs. Payment, he said with a laugh. For freeloading your whole life. Security didn't ask questions. They never do. By nightfall, I had no family, no home, and no proof that I even existed. And that was only the beginning. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Elias Moore no longer existed. I learned that quickly. Victor had moved faster than I thought possible. Before I could even make sense of Clara's confession, he'd already started making calls. By noon, my bank account was frozen due to identity discrepancies. By evening, my landlord was knocking with a locksmith standing behind him, refusing to meet my eyes. Mr. Moore, he said stiffly, I received a legal notice questioning the identity of the tenant on record. Until it's resolved, I can't allow you to stay. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the door of the apartment I'd lived in for 12 years, trying to figure out how a name could evaporate so completely. How long do I have? I asked. He checked his watch. 10 minutes. 10 minutes to pack 38 years of life. I grabbed clothes, my work boots, a watch that had once belonged to the man I thought was my father, and one framed photograph of Clara smiling at a picnic long before guilt had carved lines into her face. I didn't know why I took it. Maybe I needed proof she had once been real. When I stepped outside with 2 garbage bags, the rain started again. By nightfall, I was standing in line outside the Harborview shelter near the Dayton riverfront, surrounded by men who smelled of exhaustion and resignation. The intake volunteer asked for my ID. "I don't have one," I said. She didn't look surprised. The cot creaked under my weight. The ceiling leaked. Someone cried quietly 3 beds over. I lay there staring into the dark, replaying Clara's words again and again until they lost meaning. I wasn't her son. So whose was I? The days blurred together. I found work when I could, hauling scrap metal, clearing foreclosed houses, unloading trucks for cash. My hands, once soft from paperwork and spreadsheets, cracked and bled. I learned which convenience stores threw out food after midnight and which churches didn't ask questions before serving meals. I also learned something else. Rock bottom has levels. And I kept falling. 3 months passed before anyone said my name again. It happened on a Thursday afternoon while I was standing in the shelter's food line, staring at a plastic tray scratched by thousands of previous meals. I was practicing invisibility, head down, shoulders rounded, when polished shoes appeared in my peripheral vision. Not one pair. 2. I looked up. 2 men stood beside me, suits sharp enough to cut. The entire line went silent. Men like that didn't come to places like Harborview unless something terrible was about to happen. "Julian Hale?" the older one asked. Hearing the name Clara had spoken made my stomach drop. "If this is about money, I don't have any," I said quietly. The man smiled, not kindly, but professionally. "I'm Martin Cross. Private investigator. This is Daniel Reeve, estate counsel. We've been searching for you." "For what?" I asked. "For your father," Reeve said. "Your biological father." They took me to a hotel conference room overlooking the river. I sat at the table in borrowed clothes while documents spread out in front of me like evidence at a trial. Birth records. DNA results. Photographs. A baby with green eyes. My eyes. "Your real name," Cross said, "is Julian Alexander Hale IV." I felt dizzy. "Your father is Conrad Hale," Reeve continued. "Founder of Hale Meridian Holdings. 47 commercial properties across Manhattan and Brooklyn. Estimated value, $2.6 billion. I laughed once, sharp and broken. "You've got the wrong person. I was homeless yesterday." "That doesn't change your blood," Cross said. "Why now?" I whispered. Reeve's expression softened. "Your father is dying. Stage 4 liver cancer. Weeks at most. He never stopped looking for you." They showed me news clippings. A missing child. A reward fund that had never closed. Decades of searches that never made headlines because powerful men don't beg publicly. "He wants to see you," Reeve said. "Before it's too late." I stared at the window, at the city I barely knew, at a future I didn't recognize. And then Cross said the sentence that finally made everything make sense. "Clara Moore wasn't just a kidnapper," he said. "She was your father's half-sister." The air left my lungs. "She worked in the Hale household under a false name," he continued. "She believed the family fortune should have been hers. Taking you wasn't desperation. It was calculation." I didn't answer. I couldn't. 2 days later, I was on a private jet flying east, wearing a suit bought hours earlier, trying to breathe. Conrad Hale lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. The elevator opened directly into marble floors and silence. He was smaller than I expected. Frail. But his eyes, when they met mine, were sharp and searching. "Julian," he whispered. I stood frozen until he reached for my hand. "My son," he said. "I knew you weren't gone. A father knows." We talked for hours. He asked about my life, my work, the poverty. Each answer carved something deeper into his face. "I failed you," he said again and again. I told him the truth about Victor and Lena. He closed his eyes. "Tell him," he said to Cross. Cross opened a worn journal recovered from Clara's apartment. Pages filled with cramped handwriting. "She didn't just take you," Cross said. "She kept records. Plans. She believed raising you poor would make you loyal. That one day, the money would come through you." Conrad squeezed my hand. "She stole my son," he said hoarsely. "And watched me search for him. He died 11 days later. The will named me sole heir." At the funeral, Victor and Lena appeared, awkward in borrowed clothes, trying to smile. "We're family," Lena whispered. I looked at them calmly. "You stopped being that when you threw me away." 6 months later, the foundation was launched. The Hale Restoration Initiative. Its mission was simple. Find the others. Because Clara hadn't been alone. And somewhere out there, more stolen children were still living lies. The money didn't change me overnight. That surprised everyone, including myself. What changed me was access. For the first time in my life, doors didn't just open, they disappeared. Problems that once took months of pleading were solved with a single phone call. Entire departments returned emails within minutes. People who would have crossed the street to avoid me 3 months earlier now stood when I entered a room. But none of that erased the smell of the Harborview shelter from my memory, or the way Victor's face had twisted when he realized I no longer needed him. Conrad Hale's death made international news. Financial networks analyzed the transfer of power. Society pages speculated about the lost heir. No one mentioned Clara Moore by name. History prefers clean stories. I didn't. The Hale Restoration Initiative began quietly. No press releases. No galas. Just a conference room, a whiteboard, and Martin Cross sitting across from me with folders stacked like bricks. She wasn't alone, he said, tapping the table. We're certain of that now. Clara's journals were worse than I'd imagined. Not emotional ramblings. Not confessions written in guilt. They were operational. Dates. Addresses. Names written in shorthand. Patterns. Between 1982 and 1991, at least 15 infants from affluent households had vanished without a trace. In every case, the families had access to live-in help. In 12 of those cases, a caregiver had disappeared shortly after the incident. She believed she was correcting an imbalance, Cross said. Taking from families who had excess and redistributing through blood. Through herself, I corrected. Yes, he agreed. I authorized the first wave of investigations that afternoon. 3 weeks later, we found the first one. His name, at least the name he'd lived under, was Aaron Collins. He was 41, a welder in Toledo, divorced, 2 kids, drowning in child support. His mother had died 5 years earlier. The man believed his father had abandoned them before he was born. His biological name was Thomas Calder Jr. His father owned Calder Biotech. I watched the reunion from behind a two-way mirror. The old man sobbed like a child. Aaron stood frozen, unable to reconcile the man in front of him with the absence he'd lived with his entire life. Afterward, Aaron asked me one question. Does it ever stop feeling like your life was stolen twice? I didn't have an answer. The second case broke the news cycle. A woman named Rachel Boone, raised in rural Kentucky, living paycheck to paycheck, discovered she was the missing daughter of a Chicago commodities trader who'd spent 35 years funding private searches across 3 continents. The footage of their reunion aired everywhere. People called it heartwarming. They didn't show the aftermath. They didn't show Rachel screaming in the hotel room later that night, ripping apart framed photos, furious that her entire sense of self had been built on a lie. By the third recovery, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Clara's handwriting. I kept hearing her voice. And I started asking myself a question I didn't want answered. What if she'd succeeded? What if I'd never been found? Victor resurfaced around that time. The lawsuit arrived first, filed in civil court, alleging emotional distress, fraudulent displacement, and entitlement to compensation as a de facto sibling. My legal team dismantled it in less than an hour. He started sending letters after that. Some threatening. Some begging. Some alternating within the same page. I never replied. Lena disappeared entirely. Last I heard, she'd moved south and told people her brother had died years earlier. I understood that more than I wanted to. I returned to Dayton once. I didn't announce it. I stood across the street from the old duplex where I'd grown up, watching strangers move through rooms that still held echoes of my childhood. I thought about the man I believed was my father, the man who'd worked himself into an early grave for children who weren't even his responsibility. Clara had stolen more than a baby. She'd stolen futures that never got the chance to exist. The third major discovery nearly ended the foundation. A woman named Margaret Fields hadn't taken one child. She'd taken twins. She'd raised one in Phoenix. She'd sold the other to a couple in Vancouver. The twins were 29 when we found them. They lived 300 miles apart. Both worked in logistics. Both described a lifelong sense of incompleteness they couldn't explain. The reunion was private. Thank God. Because no camera could have handled what followed. One twin was angry. The other shattered. Neither knew how to exist in a world where their entire identity had been split and sold. I sat alone afterward in Conrad's old office, staring out at the city, realizing something essential. This wasn't restoration. It was excavation. Every truth we uncovered tore something open. Every reunion healed one wound and created another. And yet, I couldn't stop. Because somewhere out there, there were still names written in Clara's cramped hand. Still ghosts. Still parents who'd never stopped looking. The board urged caution. PR advisors warned me about donor fatigue. Lawyers suggested narrowing the mission. I ignored all of them. The money wasn't mine. It never had been. 6 months later, Harborview Shelter received an anonymous endowment large enough to keep its doors open for 2 decades. I delivered the paperwork myself. The director recognized me immediately. Elias, she said, then froze. I'm sorry. I heard. Either name is fine, I told her. One survived here. The other signs checks. She cried when she saw the number. Good. She deserved to. That night, I dreamed of Clara again. She didn't speak. She just watched. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt resolve. Because whatever she'd tried to take, she'd failed. And the reckoning she'd started wasn't finished yet. Power changes the way silence behaves. When I had nothing, silence was a shield. People ignored me, stepped around me, forgot me. When I inherited Conrad Hale's world, silence became something else entirely. It followed me. It listened. It waited. Every decision I made rippled outward, touching people who had never heard my name but would feel its consequences. The Hale Restoration Initiative grew faster than any of us anticipated. By the end of the first year, we had identified 23 probable cases linked to the same network Clara Moore had been part of. The pattern was undeniable now. The same recruitment methods. The same forged documents. The same quiet disappearances after the thefts. It wasn't a ring built on greed alone. It was built on resentment. Most of the women involved had worked in the homes of the wealthy. Nannies. Cleaners. Caregivers. They lived inside luxury without ever being allowed to touch it. Clara had found them the way cult leaders find the vulnerable, by naming the anger they already carried and offering them a way to feel powerful. She convinced them they were correcting injustice, Martin Cross said during one late-night briefing. That they were balancing scales history had rigged. And once they crossed that line, I said, they couldn't go back. No one argued. The deeper we dug, the uglier it became. One woman had taken a child out of jealousy. Another out of grief after a stillbirth. One had done it for money, trading infants like currency between desperate families who didn't ask questions they didn't want answered. Clara's journals referenced meetings. Conversations. Rules. Never take from families who will stop searching. Never leave a child where questions will be asked. Never admit regret. The final rule was underlined twice. The first arrest happened quietly. A former caregiver living under an assumed name in New Mexico was picked up on federal charges tied to falsified documents. She broke within hours. Named names. Confirmed routes. Provided proof that made prosecutors salivate. The Department of Justice reached out soon after. They wanted partnership. They wanted access. They wanted control. I said no. This isn't a PR campaign, I told them. And it isn't a trophy hunt. These families don't need cameras and indictments before answers. They didn't like that. Neither did some of my own advisors. Julian, one of them warned, you're interfering with federal jurisdiction. I'm protecting victims, I replied. Including the ones who don't know they are yet. The pressure increased. Leaks appeared in the press. Anonymous sources questioned my motives. Suggested I was laundering guilt with philanthropy. Implied that the foundation was less about justice and more about managing my image. I recognized the tactic. Victor had tried something similar. He resurfaced again a year after Conrad's death, this time not with lawsuits or letters, but with desperation. He showed up at the security gate of my Manhattan building drunk and shouting my birth name like a curse. I know you're in there, he yelled. You owe me. You hear me? You owe me. Security dragged him away. I watched from above, feeling nothing. Later that night, I pulled Clara's journal from the safe and opened it to a page I'd avoided until then. It was dated 6 months after she'd taken me. He looks at me like I'm the world. He doesn't know what he cost me. One day he will understand who really loved him. The delusion was breathtaking. The damage irreversible. The 12th recovery nearly broke the foundation. A boy named Lucas Ramirez, raised in Texas, believed his parents had died in a fire when he was 3. The woman who raised him told him the story every year on the anniversary, tears and all. The truth was worse. His biological parents were alive. They'd never stopped searching. They met for the first time in a courthouse conference room under the supervision of therapists and lawyers. Lucas didn't hug them. He didn't cry. He asked one question. Why did you wait so long to find me? No one had a good answer. Afterward, he disappeared for 3 days. We found him sitting alone on a bus bench outside a closed mall, staring at nothing. I don't belong anywhere, he said when I approached. Not with them. Not with her. Not with who I thought I was. I sat beside him. You belong to yourself, I said. That doesn't change. He didn't answer. But he stood up. Sometimes, that's all you can do. That case haunted me. Because it forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. We were restoring truth. But truth doesn't always heal. Sometimes it burns everything down and leaves people standing in the ashes with nothing but questions. The board called an emergency meeting. They wanted to limit scope, reduce investigations, focus on closed cases with high confidence, manage liability. I listened. Then I told them no. This stops when the names stop, I said. Not when it gets uncomfortable. 2 members resigned. The rest stayed. The arrest of Margaret Fields made national news. The twins' case had been impossible to contain. Prosecutors charged her with kidnapping, trafficking, and fraud. She pleaded not guilty, claiming coercion, manipulation, psychological abuse by Clara. The defense requested to subpoena foundation records. My attorneys shut that down. But the damage was done. The story shifted. From stolen children to complicated women. From victims to narratives. I hated it. In the middle of that storm, Martin Cross brought me a folder marked red. "There's one more," he said. I looked up. "One more woman?" "No," he said quietly. "One more child." I opened the folder. The name meant nothing to me at first. Until I saw the date. October 1986. 2 weeks after I was taken. "She tried to take another," Cross said. "Same city. Same hospital." "What happened?" I asked. "She failed. The baby was returned within hours. The family moved. Changed names. Disappeared. They never reported it publicly. They thought staying quiet would keep their child safe," Cross said. "Where are they now?" He hesitated. "Your father paid their relocation costs." Conrad Hale. Even then. Cleaning up damage he didn't understand yet. I closed the folder. Something settled in my chest. Clara hadn't stopped because she'd been satisfied. She'd stopped because she'd nearly been caught. The knowledge reframed everything. I wasn't chosen. I was convenient. The next time I dreamed of her, she spoke. "You lived," she said. "That means I was right." I woke up shaking. And for the first time since inheriting everything, I was angry again. Not at Victor. Not at Lena. Not even at Clara. At the system that allowed someone like her to believe theft could become destiny. The foundation crossed 40 recoveries 18 months after it began. Some reunions were quiet. Some explosive. Some never happened because the people involved chose not to reopen the past. We honored those decisions. Choice mattered. One afternoon, standing in Conrad's office, I realized something else had changed. I no longer felt split between who I'd been and who I was. Elias Moore wasn't dead. Julian Hale wasn't an imposter. They were chapters of the same story. And that story wasn't finished yet. Because there was still one loose end. One person who had never answered for what she'd done. And the truth was about to catch up to her legacy in a way she never planned. The loose end didn't have a name at first. It had a shape. It appeared in the gaps between Clara Moore's journals, in the years where handwriting thinned and entries became cautious, less confident. It lived in the pauses Martin Cross couldn't fill with dates or documents. It hid in the silence of people who should have remembered more than they were saying. For a long time, I assumed that loose end was history itself, that some questions would never be answered, some motives would die with the people who carried them. I was wrong. It was a person. And she was still alive. The realization came quietly, which somehow made it worse. Martin didn't burst into my office with a revelation. There was no dramatic phone call or urgent knock. He slid a thin folder across my desk during an otherwise ordinary briefing and said, "There's someone we never fully cleared." The folder wasn't marked red. It wasn't dramatic. It was beige. Forgettable. "That's not comforting," I said. "It shouldn't be," he replied. The name inside meant nothing to me at first. Eleanor Price. Age 76. Last known residence, rural Pennsylvania. Former occupation, caregiver placement coordinator. She never took a child herself, Martin said. That's why she stayed invisible. But she connected the women. Found them jobs. Placed them in homes where opportunity existed. She was a broker, I said. Yes. My chest tightened. Clara hadn't built the network alone. She hadn't been the architect. She'd been a lieutenant. Eleanor Price had been the quiet constant. She stopped active involvement in the early 90s, Martin continued. After the attempted abduction that failed. She disappeared off the radar. Changed names twice. No criminal record. No assets worth seizing. Why does she matter now? I asked. Because she's talking, he said. To a memoirist. The word hit harder than any indictment. She's rewriting the story, Martin went on. Framing it as social justice. Trauma redistribution. A necessary correction. I closed the folder slowly. She's selling a narrative, I said. Yes. And narratives outlive facts. Yes. I authorized immediate action. Not legal. Not public. Personal. We found Eleanor Price living in a narrow house surrounded by trees that looked deliberately planted to block the world out. She answered the door herself when Martin and I arrived, as if she'd been expecting us. "I wondered when you'd come," she said calmly. She didn't apologize. She didn't deny. She invited us in. Her living room was neat, carefully curated. Framed photos lined the mantel. Not of children. Of books. Conferences. Panels. She poured tea. "I never touched the babies," she said before we could speak. "I only helped women who'd already been touched by cruelty." "You helped them steal lives," I said. She smiled faintly. "You of all people should understand." That anger I'd buried surged back up. "I understand loss," I said. "Not theft." She studied me, her gaze sharp despite her age. "You grew up poor," she said. "You learned resilience. You survived." "By accident," I said. "Not design." She leaned forward. "Your father owned half a city. Do you think he suffered the way you did?" "He suffered in a different way," I said. "And you don't get to decide which one matters." She sighed, like someone disappointed by an unteachable student. "I believe children were better off raised by those who needed them," she said. "Not by men who treated families like assets." "Then why sell one of the twins?" I asked quietly. Her eyes flickered. That was enough. We left without another word. 3 weeks later, the memoir announcement hit the press. The framing was exactly what Martin had predicted. A misunderstood movement. Women pushed to extremes. Children saved from cold empires. My inbox flooded. Journalists wanted statements. Activists demanded debates. Critics accused me of suppressing female voices. I said nothing. Instead, I released documents. Not all of them. Just enough. Shipping logs. Placement records. Payments disguised as relocation fees. Dates that aligned too perfectly to ignore. The narrative fractured. Eleanor Price canceled her book tour. She didn't cancel the book. But she stopped talking. Then came the call I'd been waiting for, and dreading. It was from Dayton. From someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. Victor. He sounded sober. That alone told me something was wrong. "She's sick," he said. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. "Lena." I closed my eyes. "What kind of sick?" He hesitated. "The kind that doesn't wait." Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me remembered sitting beside a hospital bed while machines counted down a life. "I'm not asking for money," Victor said quickly. "I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you should know." "Why?" I asked. There was a long pause. "Because she keeps calling your name," he said. I went to Dayton 2 days later. Not as Julian Hale. As the man who'd grown up there. The hospital smelled the same. Bleach and old fear. Lena looked smaller than I remembered, swallowed by the bed, her hair thin and dull. Her eyes opened when I stepped in. For a moment, recognition flickered. Then resentment. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I didn't either," I replied. Victor stood in the corner, hands shoved into his pockets, not meeting my eyes. "You look expensive," Lena said bitterly. I ignored it. "I heard you were sick." She laughed weakly. "Yeah. Guess we don't all get miracle endings." I sat down. For a long time, none of us spoke. Then she whispered, she knew. My head snapped up. "Clara," she said. She knew what Eleanor was doing. About the others. She wasn't just protecting you. She was protecting the whole thing. "I know," I said. "She tried to stop it once," Lena continued. "I heard them fight. Years ago." She was scared. "Of being caught?" I asked. "No," Lena said. "Of being irrelevant." The words landed hard. "She told Eleanor she didn't want more children involved," Lena said. "That one was enough. Eleanor told her she didn't get to quit after benefiting." I stood slowly. Victor looked up. "What does that mean?" "It means Clara was never the end of it," I said. "She was a cog." Lena closed her eyes. "I hated you," she whispered. "Because she loved you differently." I didn't know why. "I didn't either," I said. She reached for my hand. I let her. She died 3 days later. Victor didn't come to the funeral. I paid for it anyway. Back in New York, Martin waited for me. "We have enough now," he said. "To shut Eleanor down completely." "Do it," I said. "She's old," he warned. "This will destroy what's left of her life." I looked out at the skyline Conrad had built. "So did she," I said. "To others." The indictment came quietly. Fraud. Conspiracy. Trafficking facilitation. No dramatic arrest. Just a court summons. Eleanor Price pleaded not guilty. The trial date was set. And for the first time since Clara's confession, I felt something shift. Not closure. Momentum. Because the story she tried to sell was finally colliding with the truth. and the final reckoning was coming. The trial didn't feel like justice. It felt like excavation. Eleanor Price sat at the defense table wrapped in a gray shawl, her hands folded calmly, her expression almost serene. She looked like someone's grandmother waiting for a bus, not the quiet architect of a decades-long betrayal that had splintered dozens of families. Age had softened her features, but not her certainty. Even as the charges were read, she never looked at me. I watched from the gallery, not because I needed to be there, but because absence felt like permission. The prosecution laid out the facts methodically. Placement records. Forged references. Payment trails masked as relocation assistance. Patterns so clean they became impossible to deny. One by one, former caregivers testified, some trembling with guilt, others still clinging to the language Eleanor had taught them years ago. Words like fairness, balance, correction. When the first reunited child took the stand, the courtroom changed. Not because of tears. Not because of anger. Because of silence. He described growing up believing he was unwanted, believing his parents had abandoned him. He described the moment he learned the truth and realized his entire emotional foundation had been built on a lie. I don't know who I would have been, he said quietly, but I know I was never given the chance to find out. Eleanor finally looked up then. For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not remorse. Recognition. She took the stand on the fifth day. She spoke calmly, confidently, like a lecturer addressing an uninformed audience. She framed her actions as ideological. She spoke of power imbalances, inherited privilege, generational hoarding. She described wealthy families as insulated ecosystems that didn't feel pain the way others did. And the children? The prosecutor asked. They adapted, Eleanor said. Children always do. I felt something inside me go very still. When it was my turn, the courtroom held its breath. I didn't talk about money. I didn't talk about buildings or inheritances or foundations. I talked about holding a dying woman's hand while she confessed to erasing my identity. I talked about sleeping in a shelter while my birth name made headlines I couldn't access. I talked about discovering that my life hadn't been chosen, it had been calculated. And you believe, the prosecutor asked Eleanor, that this was a moral act? Eleanor met my eyes for the first time. Yes, she said. I believe history will understand. The verdict came back guilty on all major counts. Eleanor Price was sentenced to 23 years. She would die in prison. The headlines were brutal for a week. Then the world moved on. It always does. I didn't attend the sentencing. I was in Dayton. Standing in a cemetery that smelled of wet grass and old stone, staring at a modest grave with a name that had shaped my childhood and destroyed my adulthood. Clara Moore. I stood there alone. No anger rose up. No forgiveness either. Just clarity. She had wanted to be remembered. She would be. Not as a mother. Not as a savior. But as a warning. The Hale Restoration Initiative continued its work. 49 children found. 52. 58. Some reunions healed. Others fractured further before stabilizing. Some people chose not to meet their biological families at all, and we honored that. Truth, I learned, is only useful when paired with choice. Victor disappeared after Lena's death. I heard rumors, construction work in another state, a woman, a child he didn't talk about. I didn't look for him. Some bridges burned themselves. Harborview Shelter expanded. Therapy wings. Job programs. Legal clinics. I visited often, never announced. I liked being the man who could sit in the corner unnoticed. Sometimes people recognized me anyway. They never asked for money. They asked for reassurance. Does it ever stop feeling split? One man asked me once. Like you're standing between two lives? No, I said honestly. But you learn to walk forward instead of choosing. On the anniversary of Conrad Hale's death, I stood in his old office and watched snow fall between the buildings he'd built. The city reflected in the glass like 1,000 small truths stacked on top of each other. I thought about the man who searched for his son for nearly 4 decades and found him just in time to say goodbye. I thought about the woman who stole a child to feel powerful and ended her life alone with a secret that poisoned everyone it touched. And I thought about the boy I'd been, Elias Moore, counting bills at a scratched kitchen table, believing loyalty was all a family owed each other. I am Julian Hale. I am Elias Moore. I am the product of theft and love, of lies and resilience, of loss and responsibility. The fortune I inherited was never a reward. It was a reckoning. And every child we bring home, every family that gets an answer, every lie that collapses under the weight of truth is another stolen year returned where it belongs. If my story moved you, challenged you, or reminded you that identity is fragile and truth is worth fighting for, take a moment now, support my channel, share this story, and let others know where you're watching from. Stories like this travel farther when people choose to pass them on, and you never know who might be waiting for theirs to finally reach them.